Well, actually, I have a request for Grandma. One morning, my granddaughter Natalie, now an elementary school student, shyly started talking. Grandpa's birthday is coming up soon, right? So, Natalie wants to make a lunchbox for Grandpa by himself. What a cute surprise. Natalie really loves your husband. I fully agree with my grandchild's wonderful idea, and from that day Natalie and I secretly prepared the lunchbox. Then came my husband's birthday. I'll deliver lunch to Grandpa. Grandma can wait at home. Although I was a little worried, I decided to see Natalie off at her doorstep. It's about the same distance as the school, so it's okay, right? Besides, the timing is really perfect since the first errand is a surprise for my husband. However, the situation suddenly changed when I received a phone call an hour later. It was the news that Natalie had been involved in a traffic accident. I rushed to the hospital room, where I found Natalie sleeping peacefully, looking like a different person from an hour ago. At the same time I was speechless and overwhelmed with intense regret and remorse. Why did I let her go alone? Why didn't I just tell her to wait a little longer? Why at that time? Everything is my responsibility. If I had been more patient, this tragedy would not have happened. And on this day, Natalie never woke up. Although we didn't say it out loud, we were prepared for our separation from Natalie at this time. But the next day, a miracle happened. Natalie regained her consciousness. It was in the afternoon of that day. Natalie, how are you doing? There's no way Natalie wouldn't be happy because her favorite grandpa came to visit. Just as everyone was thinking this and feeling calm, Natalie's face became increasingly pale. Grandpa. What should we do? The next moment my husband tried to approach Natalie. No. Grandpa, please don't come. Natalie crawled under the covers, trembling, and she just cried out. The strange situation caused a nurse to come rushing in from the nursing center, and my husband and I were thrown out of the hospital room in a state of confusion. What happened to these two who were such good friends? Only Natalie knew the answer. I'm Helen. I am a housewife in my 50s. Currently, I live with my husband Stanley, my daughter Caitlin, and my grandson Natalie. The story goes back about 5 years. 2 years before Caitlin's death, Caitlin's husband discovered an abnormality during a medical checkup, but her condition rapidly deteriorated from there. Despite all his efforts, he passed away at the young age of 31. Back then, whenever Caitlin was busy working part-time and supporting her husband, I would take care of Natalie at our house, and I would go to the apartment where Caitlin and the others lived to help her with the housework. After the funeral 3 years ago, I said, "Hey, Caitlin, if you don't mind, would you like to come and live with us? It's an old house, but I think it's better than having to deal with it all by yourself. Your father agrees, so why don't you do it?" I suggested that we live together. As it turns out much later, Caitlin herself secretly wanted to live together. However, she seems to have thought, I don't want to be any more selfish than this, and was prepared to live alone with Natalie. However, unexpectedly, I heard a voice. She seems to have felt a bit of a sense of indebtedness, but now that she realizes that it's okay to be pampered, she feels better. Thank you, Mom, for welcoming me and my daughter. Caitlin answered with a smile, and there were tears in her eyes. When I saw the smile on her face at that moment, I thought to myself, I'm glad I had the courage to call out to her. This is how our current family took shape. Caitlin went from being a part-time worker to an employee and now works late every day. I took Caitlin's place and dropped her off at nursery school and picked her up, and when Natalie caught a cold, I took her to the hospital and nursed her. To be honest, I had some physical difficulties due to my age, but since I was doing it for my cute grandchild, it didn't really bother me. This spring, Natalie entered elementary school. The image of Natalie joyfully carrying her brand new school bag on her way to school is reminiscent of Caitlin's childhood, making the story even more lovable. At the same time, she felt deeply moved, saying, Natalie has grown so much. Natalie was very attached to my husband, Stanley, as well as to me. This is just my speculation, but I think that her late father's image is similar to my husband. Natalie sometimes gave my husband a look that was clearly different from the sweet way she treated her grandpa. He himself realized this early on. He seems to have had mixed feelings, but he thought, if that's enough for Natalie to stay healthy, and he decided to accept the current situation as it was. I also agree with his idea. The most important thing is that Natalie's mental stability is stable. Every day has nothing special. 3 years ago, we were painfully reminded that peaceful days are the happiest thing. As the summer passed, a certain change occurred in my grandchild who celebrated her 7th birthday. Early one morning, as I was making lunch for Caitlin and my husband as usual, Natalie woke up. Grandma, what are you doing? Oh, Natalie. You woke up quite early today. This is Grandpa and Mom's lunch. They don't get school lunch like Natalie, so Grandma makes them every day. Every day. Does my grandmother make it alone every day? Yes, that's right. There's going to be a sports day in the fall, right? I'll make some for Natalie then. Wow, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you, Grandma. It was a normal conversation, nothing out of the ordinary. It was just a normal morning when Natalie just happened to wake up early. However, I can't believe that this early awakening led to something like this. At that time, I had no way of knowing. After that day, Natalie said she wanted to help her make lunch, so she started waking up early. There is a saying that early bird is worth 3 pennies, so I thought it was a great opportunity and agreed to Natalie's proposal. The mornings when I stood in the kitchen next to Natalie were so refreshing and always made me feel cheerful. Natalie herself seemed to be beginning to enjoy the increasing amount of things she could help me. I couldn't believe how happy I was to be able to be directly involved in the growth of my grandchild. Even at this age, there are still so many things I don't know. I started doing it for Natalie, but before I knew it, it had become something I enjoyed as well. The sports day has ended, and the season has arrived. My husband's birthday is coming soon. One morning, my granddaughter Natalie, now an elementary school student, shyly started talking. As I was tilting my head to see if she had anything to do, she said, "Well, actually, I have a favor to ask my grandma." Natalie began with an embarrassed tone. "Ask me something." "Oh, what is that?" "You know, it's Grandpa's birthday soon, right? And Natalie wants to make a lunchbox for Grandpa by myself. For my husband's birthday, Natalie wanted to present him with a bento box that she had made by herself. What a cute surprise. Natalie really loves my husband. I fully agreed to my grandchild's wonderful suggestion, and I secretly planned the lunchbox menu and practiced cooking eggs, which my husband loves, without my husband noticing. My husband, who later found out why there were so many egg dishes for dinner at that time, said with a shy smile, "I see. The egg dishes that time were for me." The smile on my husband's face at that moment was a precious expression that even I, who have been together for decades, have rarely seen. I thought this kind of happiness would last forever. On the morning of his birthday, Natalie enthusiastically set about making his lunch. The contents of my lunchbox were cherry tomatoes, 2 rice balls with salmon, and the thick fried egg I had practiced so much. How much sugar do I need to add to the eggs, Grandma?" "I think you should add a little more." "Okay. Then add half the egg." Since the actual event was finally upon us, Natalie was cooking more carefully than usual. While supporting Natalie, I prepare in time for her work. It was probably the result of months of helping her. Natalie's lunch-making process went very well. However, something unexpected happens here. My husband was eating breakfast in the living room when he received a phone call. "Yes, hello." "What?" "A mistake of ordering." "When did you find out about it?" "I understand. I'll be there soon, so get ready." From my husband's tone, I could tell right away that the person on the other end of the phone was a subordinate of his company. And it seems like something went wrong. My husband put him half-finished coffee in the sink and said apologetically to Natalie, "It seems there was some trouble at work. I'm sorry, but Grandpa has to go right now." But the lunchbox isn't ready yet. Can't you wait just a little longer?" "I'm sorry. If I don't go now, everyone will be in trouble. I'll eat this bento for dinner. It's just a little bit more." Natalie's expression suddenly became somber as she sensed that her surprise had failed. "I practiced so hard and still failed like this." I didn't want Natalie's feelings and her hard work to go to waste, so I immediately proposed to the two of them that we would go and deliver the bento once it was ready. "Today is Saturday and there's no school. Right? Shall we do that?" At my suggestion, Natalie's expression brightened again. Then, she jumped up and down happily and said, "That's right. Once the lunchbox is ready, all you have to do is deliver it. Natalie will go deliver it to Grandpa. Isn't that okay?" "Grandpa?" she asked while grabbing my husband's right arm. Seeing her cute gesture, even my husband's expression relaxed for a moment. He then crouched down in front of Natalie and gently patted her head. "That's right. Then, can you deliver it to me when it's finished?" "I'll let her receptionist know," he replied. Natalie becomes even more happy and replies with a cheerful smile, "I'll definitely go. That's a promise. Let's do our best," and held out her little finger in front of my husband. "Oh, I promise." My husband intertwined his little finger with her little finger and sang the familiar song, "Pinky Promise," as he promised her. And just as he had declared, he hurried to the office. For a while I wondered what would happen, but it looks like we'll be able to deliver it safely. Now, let's do our best to make the rice balls and arrange them. Yes. Although she was panicked by the unexpected situation, it looks like she will be able to give her the surprise bento as originally planned. Not only Natalie, but also myself, who has been supporting her for so long, felt relieved. However, it was probably her fault that she let her guard down. After this, I made the biggest mistake of my life. When the lunchbox was finished, Natalie said, "I want to go give it to him right now." However, Natalie and I were so busy making lunch that neither of us had even eaten breakfast yet. In addition, there was a high possibility that the problem inside the car would not be resolved by saying "right now." In the worst-case scenario, she might not be able to meet my husband. So I suggested, if you go right away, he might still be at work. So first, let's have breakfast together. However, Natalie refused and said, "I want to give it to him right away." I tried to persuade Natalie for a while, but she just wouldn't relent on this particular day. I guess she can't control her desire to give her the lunchbox she made for my husband as soon as possible. This is the first time Natalie has asked me so desperately. This time I have no choice but to relent. Anyway, you're just like Stanley in your stubbornness. I found something unexpected in common between my husband and my grandchild, and my cheeks relaxed. After putting the freshly prepared lunch and cutlery into his usual lunch bag, he handed the bag to Natalie and said, "Okay, let's go give it to him now." Natalie nodded happily, and she carefully held his lunchbox. But I'm getting ready to go out, so could you please wait for a little while? I can't go to my girlfriend's husband's office without putting on my makeup and doing my hair. That's why I asked Natalie for some time. However, Natalie said, "It's okay because I can go by myself." "Grandma, please make breakfast and wait for me." Then he put on her shoes and unlocked her front door. "Oh, wait a minute. Natalie." She hurried to stop Natalie, but Natalie was already outside the door. I raised my voice a little and told Natalie, "It's dangerous to be alone. It'll be over soon, so let's go together." Still, Natalie couldn't stop her and she said, "It's okay because I've been there before. I'll deliver lunch to Grandpa. Grandma can wait at home. Come away." At that moment, I thought, it may be impossible to stop the curtain on today. Although I was worried, I thought lightly, well, it's less than 15 minutes away, so it's okay, right? I walked the same distance to school every morning. I turned to Natalie and said, "Be careful of cars. Do you understand?" I said and just saw her off. Natalie smiled at me and waved cheerfully, then replied, "Okay, I'll go." She happily headed towards my husband. I watched her until I could no longer see her. To tell the truth, the two of us had visited the company several times to deliver something he had forgotten. On the way, once you reach the main road, just cross the traffic light and go straight. What's more, my grandchild has been begging her for some time now, saying, "I want to go spend money by myself." How wonderful that her first errand was a surprise lunch box for my husband. The perfect timing to accomplish what Natalie wanted to do and the present for my husband at the same time. At that moment, rather than worry, I was filled with joy and a sense of accomplishment. However, the situation suddenly changed when she received a phone call an hour later. "Hello. Hospital. Is that true? Is it possible that I'm the wrong person?" Yes. Understood." I'll call you right away. It was the news that Natalie had been involved in a traffic accident. I hurriedly rushed to the hospital I was told about and asked the receptionist. I was immediately taken to the intensive care unit. When I met Natalie, I found her sleeping peacefully, with her whole body wrapped in bandages and many tubes connected to her arms. I was at a loss for words when I saw her, who was a different person than she was an hour ago. At the same time, I thought, it's my fault. If only I had managed to stop Natalie at that time. If only I could just go to work with Natalie without worrying about her makeup or hairstyle. If they hadn't said, "I'll deliver it later," this tragedy would never have happened in the first place. Words like these that were blaming herself came to her mind, and her eyes became increasingly dark. I wonder how many minutes have passed since she arrived at the hospital. Before I knew it, her daughter Caitlin and my husband had arrived in front of the hospital room. "Caitlin, I'm sorry. I did something terrible. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." "Mom, calm down. It's not your fault, okay? Caitlin is right. Now let's hope Natalie wakes her up. But it's my fault that Natalie is in danger now. Don't cry." I don't have the right to cry. Even though I thought this, I couldn't stop the regret from overflowing into tears. And on this day, Natalie never woke up. Although we didn't say it out loud, we were prepared to part with Natalie at this time. But the next day, a miracle happened. "Natalie, I'm so glad you woke her up." Natalie regained consciousness in the early hours of the day, and she was apparently able to eat a little. Her expression remained stiff, perhaps as a result of the terrible accident that had happened to her, but fortunately she was told that there was little chance of her suffering from any disability or after effects. The accident involving Natalie was caused by her driver running a red light. The assailant's car crashed into the victim who was making a right turn, sending the victim's car flying onto the sidewalk. And there, waiting at a traffic light, was Natalie. Luckily for her, a traffic light pole stood between Natalie and the car, which allowed her to avoid a direct collision. However, since she hit her head hard when she was mowed down with a pole, she is scheduled to undergo various tests after this. On this day, Caitlin and I worked hard all morning to take care of Natalie's personal and emotional needs so that she wouldn't get anxious. Natalie had a hard expression on her face in the morning, but by the end of her morning exam, she was smiling. It was past noon and visiting hours were coming to an end. "Natalie, how are you doing?" My husband worked hard to finish his work and managed to make it in time for the visit. At this time, Caitlin and I were thinking the same thing. You can see Natalie's biggest smile of the day. Natalie couldn't be happier, since her husband, who is especially loved in her family, came to see her. Everyone was thinking that, and just as we were feeling calm, she said, "Grandpa. What should I do?" Her face became increasingly pale. "Natalie, what's wrong? Your face is pale." We were just confused by the unexpected reaction. But the person who was most confused was definitely my husband. "Natalie, what's wrong? Are you okay?" Here, I bought Natalie's favorite sweets. The next moment my husband tried to approach Natalie. "No. Grandpa, don't come." Natalie crawled into her bed, trembling, and she cried out, Seeing the strange situation, a nurse came rushing in from the nursing center, and my husband and I were thrown out of the hospital room in a state of confusion. Natalie's crying and Caitlin's gentle voice could be heard faintly leaking from behind the closed door. Did I do something to Natalie? What's wrong with me? For now, let's leave this to Caitlin and go home. Oh, that's right. That day, I quietly left her hospital room while supporting my depressed husband. At night, Caitlin, who was still in the hospital room, asked Natalie how he was doing, but she said, after his father came home, he calmed down, and there were no problems with his eating and examinations, but he didn't tell me why he was crying. My husband was more depressed than anyone else because of his unexplained condition. Then, Caitlin said, I was just thinking about it, but maybe it's because she couldn't give you his lunch because of the accident. Maybe Natalie thought you would get mad at her about that. I talked about possible causes. My husband and I were strangely convinced by what Caitlin said, and I said, that's a possibility. Then let's talk to Natalie about it tomorrow. If she knows that Stanley isn't angry, she would meet him with peace of mind. Ah, that's right. Well then, please help me. However, in reality, it may not be that simple. The next day, I went to see Natalie by myself because Caitlin has her work. I decided to talk to Natalie about the incident when she was taking a breather after finishing her morning preparations for the test. Hey, Natalie. About yesterday. What about yesterday? Look, you cried because you didn't want to see your grandpa, right? I'd like to talk to you about that, okay? When I timidly begin, Natalie's expression hardens again. Then, as if to escape from what I was saying, she put the blanket over her head and she said, No, Grandpa. Don't call him at all, and she got scared. I panicked and called out to Natalie, Grandpa isn't particularly angry. So don't worry, okay, but it didn't seem to reach Natalie's ears. In the end, my husband was unable to go see Natalie that day either. Since then, I have tried to suggest a meeting with my husband every chance I get, but she just cries, saying, I can't have my grandpa. Please, please don't bring him. I don't even know why, and there were days that I didn't understand. Natalie was so frightened that at one point Caitlin and I suspected that my husband himself was to blame. I don't think it's possible. But isn't it possible that Stanley did something terrible to Natalie? For example, he said something that pushed her into a mental corner. Or that she was disciplined beyond her limits. It's true that incidents like that are reported on TV, but I don't think that's the case with my father. He's always been as kind to me as ever. That's right. There's no way Stanley would do something like that. So what in the world is Natalie so afraid of about my husband? That's what it is. I consulted a doctor, but he said, your memory may be confused by the shock of the accident, so it's best to wait until you recover before dealing with it. I feel bad for your father, but you might have to put up with it for a while. That's the only option. Let's all do what we can for Natalie. Considering my husband's character and his past behavior, it is difficult to believe that he did anything terrible to his grandchild. However, judging from Natalie's unusually frightened appearance, it was clear that something had happened. But I didn't know what it was for a long time. Is it, as the doctor said, a memory disorder caused by an accident? If that's the case, what exactly is Natalie misunderstanding? It wasn't until a few weeks later, the day before she was discharged from the hospital, that I found out her answer. On this day, Natalie looked somewhat uneasy, even though it was finally decided that she would be discharged from the hospital. I soon realized that the reason was my husband. Tomorrow, we'll be back to living with her again. But at this rate, the relationship between my husband and our grandchild will be completely different than before. This may be our last chance. I sat down in a chair near her and asked Natalie as slowly and gently as possible. Before you go home, there's something I want Natalie to tell you. May I ask? Natalie seemed to realize what I was about to hear from just those words. Although she still looked frightened, she seemed determined to tell me the truth. Grandma, do you remember when I made a pinky promise with Grandpa? Yes, of course. Then, I guess it's no good after all. Even if I get discharged from the hospital, I'll go to heaven right away where my dad is. However, the truth Natalie told me was incoherent, incomplete, and difficult to understand, like a story made up by her young child. I decided to slowly find out what Natalie was afraid of and what she was trying to convey. At first, Natalie was frightened and kept repeating, "I can't do it anymore. I did pinky swear, so I can't do it." However, as I patiently talked with her, I realized that Natalie was trapped in a certain story. The story was one of the picture books Natalie's husband gave her when she was in kindergarten. The content is very simple. If you break your promise, a demon will appear and punish you by making you swallow 1,000 needles. Yes, the content of this picture book was almost the same as the lyrics of Pinky Swear. I had promised to deliver the lunchbox, but I couldn't keep it. That's why I'm forced to swallow 1,000 needles. But if you do that, you'll end up with a lot of needles, right? I was so scared of that I hid to avoid seeing my grandpa. I see. But I guess if you apologize to Grandpa, it'll be okay. No. They say a demon is someone who is crying because they've been lied to. So if I meet my grandpa, he'll make me swallow needles, so I can't meet him. Apparently, Natalie believed that the victim of a broken promise would force the perpetrator to swallow the needle. And in this case, it seems my husband is the victim and Natalie is the perpetrator. That's why she seems to think that my husband is coming to force the liar Natalie to take 1,000 needles from him. I couldn't help but burst out laughing at this cute idea. I wonder what happened during those days when I was so worried and at one point even doubted my husband's kindness. I couldn't stop laughing as I realized that just like Natalie's assumptions and misunderstandings, I had made a big mistake myself. Grandma. Natalie, who had finished the biggest confession of her life and was suffering from remorse and regret, was confused by my laughing out loud. "I'm sorry," I apologized, and drank the tea I was holding in one gulp. After catching my breath, I made a proposal to Natalie. Then Natalie replied, "I see. That's right. Thank you, Grandma. I'll do my best," and she returned to the same bright, cheerful smile she had before the accident. When I saw that smile, I finally felt that I could finally go back to my normal life. The next day, when Natalie leaves her hospital room, there is no longer any worry or fear on her face. She was beaming with joy at being able to return to her happy normal life and with her enthusiasm for what she was about to do. A few days later, on a Saturday morning, Natalie and I resumed making our morning lunches. The menu for my first bento after being discharged from the hospital was the same cherry tomatoes, 2 salmon rice balls, and a thick fried egg. Of course, Natalie is the only one who makes it. Since it was her second attempt, Natalie's skill was even better. Okay, done. Now, do you want to eat breakfast? Yes, let's do that. Unlike that day, as the two of us ate a hearty breakfast, I remembered our conversation in the hospital room. Natalie was staring at me with a shocked expression as I laughed out loud. I suggested to Natalie, then let's make another lunchbox and deliver it to him. That way, we won't be breaking his promise, right? Thanks to my suggestion, Natalie regained her old smile. Her relationship with my husband was successfully repaired, leading to his lunchbox today. The only thing left to do is deliver it, but don't let your guard down. In order to avoid repeating the mistakes of that day, Natalie and I decided on a departure time in advance. Furthermore, I dressed myself before making the lunchbox and was ready to go out at any time. Natalie herself seemed to be remorseful for her hasty actions, and was very calm that day. Still, she probably can't help but feel impatient. She checked her watch many times and said, "Oh, it's not here yet." I also spend time washing dishes while watching the clock. Then, oh, look. It's time, isn't it? Can I get ready? Natalie happily came to report to me, shouting, "I've been waiting." I smiled and replied, "Okay. Let's go." Then, Natalie carefully carried his lunchbox and headed to the door, saying, "Grandma, hurry up." She put on her shoes and was waiting for her. I replied in a low voice, "Yes, yes," and she and Natalie went out the door. The two then walked side by side, holding hands, to the office where her husband was waiting. When I arrived at the company, the receptionist guided me to my husband's department. Usually, I just hand in my forgotten items at the reception desk, but it seems like today I can bring them into the office. The look on Natalie's face when she stepped into the special space of his company was more nervous than she had ever seen it before. The expression on her face was so cute that not only me, but also the receptionist was smiling at her. "This is the department. Now, please excuse me." After a brief nod, I immediately looked for my husband. Then we heard my husband's voice from the back of the room, "Natalie," and Natalie looked happily towards his voice. "Grandpa." As soon as she called for my husband, Natalie started running and jumped into my husband's chest, still holding her lunch. Then, with a confident smile on her face, she handed the lunch to her husband, saying, "Yes, lunch. I made it all by myself." "I see. You made it all by yourself. Thank you. Well, I need to eat it now." My husband carried us to a nearby rest area, holding our lunchbox as if he was holding a newborn baby. As the three of us sit down at a round table in the rest area, my husband opens his lunchbox with a strangely nervous look on his face. Then, with a small cry of joy, he grabbed the thick fried egg with his chopsticks and brought it to his mouth. "Grandpa, is it delicious?" Natalie asked my husband, a little worried. Then he looked up at the sky and said, "Oh, it's delicious. It's the best thing I've ever eaten." Tears were welling up in his eyes. "What happened? Are you okay?" "Oh, of course. I was just surprised at how delicious Natalie's lunchbox was. Well then, Natalie will continue to make you lunch. Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. As I watched the exchange between Natalie and my husband, I was alone thinking about the words, "from now on." Peaceful daily life and unfortunate events always sit side by side, like Caitlin's husband's illness and this accident. That is why we must not neglect the utmost safety and consideration that we can, in order to live a calm and peaceful life from now on. And let's live to the fullest in this moment. That's what I thought.